Some stories are not told to be explained. They exist like traces, without origin, without proof. In a forest in northern Thailand, there stands a tree that was never planted, never grew, and never died. People do not ask what it is. They only know not to sleep beneath it. This is not a story about fear. It is a story about what remains after people are gone. Chapter 1. The Tree with No Age. There was no proper road leading to the tree. To reach it, one had to follow a narrow path cutting through the forest, where sunlight was smothered by thick layers of leaves, turning daytime into something closer to dusk. The ground was always damp beneath one's feet, soft, carrying the smell of rotting leaves, and another scent that was difficult to name. The smell of soil that had been dug up and buried again. Many times. The people of Ban Mae Kam village did not call it an ancient tree. They simply called it the tree. And nothing more was said. The tree stood at the center of a perfectly round clearing, as if the forest itself had chosen to keep its distance. Other trees did not grow too close. Weeds were unusually sparse. The trunk was massive, rough, dark brown, almost black. Its bark was split into long, irregular cracks, resembling old scars on the skin of a body that had aged and hardened long ago. 4 grown men, arms fully outstretched, could not wrap around its trunk. Its roots pushed above the ground, twisted and overlapping, forming shapes that made people uneasy if they stared for too long. Some bends resembled knees, some bulges looked like shoulders. When it rained, water pooled between the roots, dark and still, like eyes opening from beneath the earth. No one remembered when the tree had first appeared. The oldest woman in the village, Tip, well into her 90s, once said that when she was a barefoot child running through the forest, the tree already looked exactly the same. Not smaller, not younger. It had never changed. Each rainy season, its leaves fell. Each dry season, its branches stood bare. But the trunk never grew older. No one had ever seen it planted. No one had ever seen it grow. And no one had ever seen anything sprout from its base. There was an unspoken understanding in the village, something everyone knew but no one openly discussed. If an outsider asked, people would fall silent or quickly change the subject. But when night fell, and the sound of insects grew heavier than usual, doors were shut tight, curtains drawn, and no one looked toward the forest. Because at night, the tree was not the same as it was during the day. Some said its shadow did not stay still. Under moonlight, it stretched unnaturally long, bending in ways that did not match the shape of the trunk. At times, the shadows of its roots looked like enormous fingers gripping the ground, as if trying to keep something from escaping. No one stayed to confirm it. No one went near after sunset. There was a rule in the village, never written down, never displayed, and no one remembered who had first made it, yet it had been passed down from one generation to the next. Do not cut the tree. Do not dig the ground around its roots. And never, ever sleep beneath its canopy. No punishment was mentioned. No threat was spoken. Only averted eyes and stories that stopped halfway. On certain nights, when the wind blew from the forest toward the village, some claimed they heard the sound of wood rubbing against wood, very faint, very slow, like someone grinding their teeth in their sleep. But when doors were opened and people looked out, the forest stood still. The tree remained there, silent. On nights like that, the dogs did not bark. They crawled beneath houses, ears flattened, bodies trembling, as if listening to something humans could not hear. The tree did not move. It did not make any clear sound. It did nothing at all. Yet no one in Ban Mae Kam would ever say that it was harmless. Because they knew. There are things that do not need to act, to ensure that everything around them never feels normal again. Chapter 2. The First Taboo. The rule against sleeping beneath the tree was never written down. It was not posted at the village hall. It was not preached by monks at the temple. It was never formally announced during the rare village meetings. Yet every child born in Ban Mae Kam learned it before learning how to read. Children were taught early. Not through explanation, but through the way adults lowered their voices when the tree was mentioned. Through the way their expressions hardened. Through how they pulled children away from the forest when the sun began to sink behind the mountains. Do not sleep there. That was all. No one said that you would die if you did. No one said spirits would take you. No one described any specific consequence. The silence itself carried the weight. In the past, when the village was poorer, many people slept in the forest to guard crops and fields. They built small fires, tied hammocks between trees, and slept surrounded by insects and damp earth. But no matter how exhausted they were, they never tied their hammocks near the tree. The distance was kept instinctively, as if the body itself understood where safety ended. There were those who tested the taboo, not out of bravery, but out of disbelief. Many years ago, after drinking rice wine at a rainy season festival, a group of young men laughed when the elders repeated the old rule. They said the tree was just a tree, that the stories were only meant to frighten children. One of them, a man named Chai, said he would prove it. That night, Chai took a thin mat and walked straight into the forest. No one followed him, no one stopped him. The villagers only watched in silence, as if they had already seen the outcome. The next morning, Chai did not return. They found him after the sun had risen high enough to light the clearing. Chai was still alive. He lay beneath the tree, eyes wide open, staring up into the canopy. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. When they shook him awake, his body was cold, as if it had been submerged in water for hours. There were no wounds, no signs of attack, only the smell of soil clinging to his back, and his hands twisted tightly. Fingernails broken, as though he had been gripping something all night. Chai lived for 3 more years. During those 3 years, he never slept for more than a few hours at a time. Each time he closed his eyes, he jolted awake in panic, gasping, drenched in sweat. He never said what he had seen. When asked, he only shook his head and avoided the forest from that day onward. In the 3rd year, Chai hanged himself in the storage shed behind his house. The villagers did not say his death was caused by the tree. They did not say it wasn't. After Chai, the rule no longer needed to be repeated. No one tested it again, not because they believed completely, but because they understood that some answers were better left unknown. When night fell and the wind blew from the forest, carrying its familiar damp scent, people closed their doors earlier. Oil lamps were extinguished sooner. Conversations softened, then faded away. Out there, in the forest, the tree still stood. No one saw it move. No one heard it call anyone's name. Yet sometimes, very rarely, very faintly, there was the sense that the ground beneath their feet was breathing. And on nights like that, no one slept well.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The man Who lost his voice. The man arrived in Ban Mae Kam at the beginning of the dry season. He came alone, carrying a large backpack, wearing new hiking boots, and holding a leather notebook that never left his arm. He introduced himself as Somchai, from Bangkok, working for a land survey company. He spoke politely, his eyes alert, his voice steady, the voice of someone accustomed to long journeys. The villagers listened, nodded, and stopped there. They did not ask questions. Somchai rented an empty wooden house near the edge of the village. On his first afternoon, he walked around, taking notes, measuring distances, taking photographs. When he noticed the forest behind the village, his gaze lingered longer than necessary. He asked about the tree. Not directly. He only asked if there was anything noteworthy in the forest. No one answered clearly. One middle-aged man said the forest was dense. A woman said the paths were difficult. A child was pulled away before he could speak. The evasiveness did not trouble Somchai. It only made him more curious. He did not say this aloud. He simply smiled, nodded, and returned to his rented house. That evening, Somchai packed a hammock, a flashlight, and some dried food. He said he would sleep in the forest to make surveying easier the next morning. No one stopped him. No one walked him out. The wooden doors closed behind him more quickly than usual. Somchai tied his hammock beneath the canopy of the tree. He did not know this was the first taboo. The forest at night was unlike anything he had experienced before. There were no thick layers of insect noise, no familiar chaos of jungle sounds. Everything was too quiet. The wind moved through the leaves, but it did not create the expected rustling. It felt as if something was actively preserving silence. Somchai lay in the hammock, turned on his flashlight, and wrote a few lines in his notebook. When he switched the light off, darkness pressed in so heavily it felt as though the space itself had collapsed. He could hear his own breathing, loud, uneven. At times, he felt as if someone was standing very close. There were no footsteps, no other breathing, only the sensation of cold spreading along the back of his neck, as though something had leaned down to observe him. The next morning, Somchai was found beneath the tree. He was no longer in the hammock. The hammock still hung there, unbroken, undisturbed. Somchai sat against the trunk, head tilted back, eyes wide open. His collar was soaked with sweat, though the morning air was cool. When someone called his name, he turned his head. His mouth opened. No sound came out. He tried to speak. His throat tightened. His chest moved, but the sound seemed to be held somewhere inside. Unable to escape, panic filled his eyes. He clutched the shirt of the man in front of him, as if begging, trying to say something urgent. They brought him back to the village. Somchai was not injured. He had no fever. There were no signs of a stroke. Doctors in the nearby town said his vocal cords were intact. There was no clear medical explanation. Somchai left the village after 3 days. Before leaving, he stood for a long time looking toward the forest. The curiosity was gone from his face. What remained was a fear tightly compressed, as though he was carrying a secret too heavy to release. 1 month later, news came from Bangkok. Somchai was found dead in his apartment. Hanged. No suicide note. His leather notebook was never recovered. The villagers did not speak of it for long. They only grew quieter whenever the wind blew from the forest. The rule against sleeping beneath the tree no longer felt like a warning. It became a fact of existence. The tree remained where it was. No one saw it act. No one heard it speak. But after the night Somchai slept beneath its canopy, people began to notice something new on the trunk. Additional carvings. Chapter 4. The marks on the trunk. The marks did not appear all at once. They came slowly, quietly, the way the forest changes without announcing itself. At first, they were only thin lines, so faint they were easy to miss unless one stood very close. They were scattered across the trunk at chest height, with no pattern, no recognizable symbols. They were not letters, not charms, not boundary markings. The longer one looked, the clearer it became that the marks were too chaotic to be accidental, yet too similar to have been made by different hands. Some of the marks were shallow, barely breaking the outer bark. Others cut deep, exposing the dark wood beneath. The edges were uneven, torn rather than sliced, as if they had not been made with a blade or an axe, but with something softer. Fingernails. The thought was never spoken aloud, but anyone who stood before the tree long enough reached the same conclusion, then turned away quickly, as if the thought itself had crossed a boundary. What unsettled the villagers most was not the shape of the marks, but how they appeared. No one ever saw anyone carve them. There were no unfamiliar footprints around the tree, no fallen wood chips, no abandoned tools. Yet with every passing year, every rainy season, more marks appeared. People began to notice that the marks were not spread evenly across the trunk. They clustered in specific areas, as if someone had once stood in one spot, reaching upward, clinging desperately, and scratching wildly in panic. Some clusters were low, close to the ground. Others were higher, as if the one who made them had been lifted. One morning, after a heavy rain, the villagers helped Tip walk closer to the tree. She stared at the trunk for a long time, eyes narrowed. Her trembling hand pointed toward a group of newly formed marks. She did not speak at first. When she finally did, her voice was low and hoarse. They weren't there yesterday. No one asked how she knew. No one questioned her certainty. They all knew she had been looking at that tree for her entire life. After that day, no one stood too close to the trunk for long anymore. Those who had to pass through the forest quickened their pace, avoiding looking directly at the bark. Yet even without looking, they felt as if the marks were facing them. Once, a child reached out and touched one of the carvings. The child said the bark there was warmer than the rest. That night, the child developed a high fever and spoke incoherently, whispering words no one could fully understand. He said someone had stood in the dark, taken his hand, placed it against the tree, and held it there. The next morning, a new mark appeared on the trunk. Small. Shallow. No one mentioned the incident again. After Somchai's death, something else began to happen. On windless days, the leaves of the tree still trembled slightly. Not enough to be noticed at a glance. Just enough to produce a faint sound, like skin brushing against skin. If one stood close enough, the sound followed a strange rhythm. Not steady, not natural, more like a breath being restrained. No one stayed to listen more carefully. They turned their backs, returned home, closed their doors, and left the darkness to deal with itself. The tree did not change its position. It did not grow larger. It did not fall. But the marks on its trunk continued to appear, overlapping older ones, cutting across previous scars, like the record of many people who had once tried to cling to it, and all of them had failed. No one said the tree was holding something inside. Yet from the moment the marks appeared, everyone understood that the tree was no longer something meant only to be seen. It was remembering.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The child Who heard the calling. The child's name was Niran. He was 8 years old, thin, sun-darkened, the kind of child who spoke little but noticed everything. His parents worked fields near the edge of the village, so Niran had grown up with the forest, its insects, its silences, the long stretches of quiet that never made adults uneasy. But after one particular night, Niran stopped sleeping properly. He would wake in the middle of the night, sit straight up on his mat, eyes open, staring toward the window that faced the forest. He did not cry. He did not call for his parents. He simply sat there for a long time, as if listening to something far away. The next morning, his mother asked him why. Niran said, "The tree is calling me." Not with sound. There was no voice. He said it felt like thinking a thought very clearly, except the thought was not his. It appeared in his mind slowly, heavily, and did not disappear no matter how hard he tried to think of something else. The adults in the house fell silent. No one scolded him. No one laughed. They only told Niran not to go into the forest alone anymore. But the tree did not need Niran to come closer. In the days that followed, Niran began saying strange things. He said the tree was lonely. He said the tree could not move. He said the tree remembered the people who had stood beneath it for a very long time. No one asked how he knew. No one wanted to hear more. One afternoon, when the sun stood directly overhead, Niran disappeared from the yard. They found him standing in front of the tree, his forehead pressed against the rough bark, both hands resting on a cluster of old carvings. He did not move. Not the stillness of someone frozen, but the stillness of someone choosing not to leave. When the adults pulled him away, Niran did not resist, but the moment his body was separated from the trunk, he screamed, a raw, hoarse sound that did not belong to a child. He said the tree was not finished speaking. That night, Niran developed a high fever. In his delirium, he spoke continuously. His voice was deeper than usual, broken, as if someone were using his mouth to speak but was unfamiliar with it. He spoke of darkness beneath the soil. He spoke of roots coiling around things that were soft and warm. He said there were many people standing very close together, with no room to lie down. By morning, the fever had broken. Niran woke up with no memory of what he had said. But from that day on, whenever he passed near the forest, he always turned his head toward the tree, as if someone were standing there, waiting. The villagers began keeping children away from the forest. Old stories were repeated again, fragmented, without beginnings or endings, and in their restless nights, many adults began to share the same dream. In the dream, they stood very close to the tree. There was no bark, no leaves, only a massive shape, vaguely human, anchored to the ground, unable to move. It had no eyes, only a mouth stretched wide, as if trying to call out, but producing no sound. When they woke, their throats burned, dry and sore, as though they had been screaming all night. Out in the forest, the tree remained still. But from the moment Niran heard the calling, the villagers understood something new. The tree did not need to be touched in order to touch back. It only needed to be heard. Chapter 6. The Shared Dream. The dream did not arrive all at once. At first, it came to a few of the elders, then to the middle-aged, then to young men and women who usually slept deeply and without dreams. No one spoke about it, but each morning, when eyes met by chance, the same signs were there: raw throats, sunken eyes, and a silence that lingered longer than usual. There was no need to ask. They knew the others had seen it too. In the dream, it always began the same way. There was no transition, no clear moment of falling asleep. One simply realized that they were standing in the forest. At the familiar clearing, the light was dim, neither night nor day. The air was thick, heavy, making every breath feel deliberate. The tree stood there. But it was not entirely a tree. The trunk stretched and warped, swelling in places where it should not. The roots rose from the ground, no longer anchored downward, but wrapped around a shape that resembled a human body. Some roots pierced into flesh, others only tightened, as if holding something that must not be allowed to leave. There was no blood. There were no screams. Only the sensation of being compressed, of having no space left to move. The thing bound within the roots had a face. But the face had no eyes. Only deep, empty hollows, as if something had once been there and had been taken away. Its mouth was stretched wide, wider than a human mouth should be. Yet no sound came out. The dreamer always stood very close. Close enough to see the cracks on the surface that looked like skin. Close enough to feel a faint warmth, too weak to be called life. But not cold enough to be death. No one stepped forward. No one stepped back. They simply stood there, motionless, and in a stretch of time that could not be measured. They understood that the thing being held was aware of them, not through sight, but through something deeper. When they woke, they often sat up gasping, hearts racing, their throats burned, as if they had tried to scream in the dream, but the sound had been trapped somewhere deep inside. No one slept well anymore. Niran began drawing strange shapes in the dirt with a stick. He did not draw trees. He drew eyeless figures, packed tightly together, tangled in winding lines. When his mother asked what they were, Niran answered softly, "They're standing too close." One morning, Tip collapsed in front of her house. It was not a heart attack, not a stroke. Her body had simply lost the will to remain upright. Before closing her eyes, she whispered, as if speaking only to herself, "They can't lie down." After that day, something else began. At night, when the village sank into shallow, uneasy sleep, some people heard breathing rising from the forest. Not wind, not animals, but heavy, synchronized breaths, as if many people were trying to inhale together in a space that was too small. The dogs did not bark. They lay still, eyes open, ears pressed flat, listening to something meant for no human ears. The tree did not move. It did not call out. But from the moment the shared dream began, the villagers understood one thing clearly. The tree was no longer standing only in the forest. It had entered their sleep.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The monk Who could not chant. The monk arrived in the village on a gray afternoon. He was neither young nor old. His saffron robe was worn thin at the hem. His sandals frayed. His steps slow but steady. He did not ask many questions. He listened. The villagers spoke in fragments, avoided looking toward the forest, and chose their words carefully. The monk nodded and did not press for clarity. When he was led to the edge of the forest, he stopped, not in fear, but as if he were measuring the distance between himself and something that should not be drawn too close. The tree stood there, silent as always. The monk placed his cloth bag on the ground, lit a stick of incense, and began to chant. His voice was even, low, familiar in temple halls, but as it rose in the forest, the sound was swallowed almost immediately. It did not echo. It did not linger. It was as if the air around the tree refused to hold sound. By the third line of the chant, the wind began to move. Not strong. Not sudden. Just enough to make the leaves tremble in an uneven rhythm. The incense burned sideways. The smoke did not rise. It crawled horizontally, wrapped around the trunk, and disappeared. The monk continued. His lips moved. The chant followed the rhythm of his breathing. Then, halfway through a verse, the sound vanished, not because he stopped, His throat still worked, his chest still rose and fell. But the chant no longer emerged. Slowly, the monk closed his mouth. He did not panic. He did not try again. He bowed deeply, holding the position for a long time, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he stood, picked up his bag, and turned away from the tree. Before leaving, he said only one sentence: "This is not a place to call." No one asked whom he meant. No one asked what should not be called. That night, many villagers dreamed of the monk standing before the tree, without a mouth. His face was smooth and blank, as if a mouth had never existed. In the dream, he tried to chant by breathing alone, but each breath stretched unnaturally and dissolved into the trunk. The next morning, the monk left the village before dawn. He did not return. He left no message. He left no charms. After that day, no one spoke of inviting anyone else. They understood that not everything was meant, or permitted, to be intervened in. The tree remained where it was, unpunished, unsoothed. But on very quiet nights, people began to notice something new. The roots were no longer in the same place. Not by much. Just enough. As if, while no one was watching, the tree had moved closer. Chapter 8. The roots that could move. No one ever saw the roots move. They did not crawl before anyone's eyes. They made no sound. The ground did not crack open, nor did nearby trees fall. But one morning, while mist still clung low to the earth, the first person walking toward the forest stopped for a long time on the familiar path. The path was narrower. Not because grass had grown. Not because the soil had collapsed. A thick, gnarled root had extended farther, lying directly across the trail. The surface of the root was dry and rough, thinly coated with moss, as if it had been there for a long time. But yesterday, it had not been in that position. The man said nothing. He simply turned back toward the village, walking more slowly than usual, and avoided looking directly at the forest. By midday, two others noticed the same thing. The roots did not appear suddenly. They advanced by small increments, subtle enough to make people doubt their own memory. Could we be remembering it wrong? The question was never answered. Because the more people looked, the more they realized that the clearing around the tree was shrinking. The space the forest had once kept around it was being filled with tangled roots, overlapping and crossing like exposed veins beneath torn skin. No one dug the ground to check. No one measured distances. They simply remembered where things had been, and quietly compared. At night, some heard a faint sound rising from beneath the soil. It did not resemble roots scraping against stone. It did not sound like animals burrowing. It was more like something heavy being dragged, slow and steady, then stopping for a long while, as if resting. The village dogs abandoned their usual sleeping places. They avoided areas where roots surfaced, even spots where they had once lain during the day. An old dog chained near the forest edge suddenly howled one night, the sound stretching until it grew hoarse, then cut off abruptly. The next morning, its chain was found pulled tight into the earth, as if something below had seized it. The dog was gone. There was no blood, no drag marks, only a newly exposed root, lying very close to the wooden stake. The villagers began changing their routes. Old paths were abandoned. Plots of land near the forest were left untouched. Yet no matter how they avoided it, there was a shared feeling that the roots were finding other ways. Niran stopped drawing human figures. Instead, he drew winding lines layered across the ground, covering everything. When his mother asked what they were, Niran answered softly, "They're looking for empty space." That night, many dreamed of standing on ground that felt unnaturally soft. Each step sank deeper, and from beneath the damp soil, something wrapped around their ankles, holding them still. When they looked down, they did not see roots. They saw arms without hands, twitching faintly, as if trying to remember their own shape. Morning came, and the ground looked the same as ever. But the path was no longer where it had been the day before. The tree did not fall. It did not tremble. It simply spread outward, slowly, patiently, as if it knew that sooner or later, every empty space would be gone.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The woman WHO disappeared. The woman's name was Molly. She was 32 years old and had known the forest since childhood. Molly knew where mushrooms grew after the rain, where the ground turned soft and dangerous, where one should not linger when daylight began to fade. She did not fully believe the old stories, but she never mocked them either. She kept her distance, like everyone else. That morning, Molly entered the forest early. She carried a woven basket, a small knife, and a rope tied loosely around her waist. She said she would return before noon. The sky was overcast, but it had not yet rained. A light wind drifted from deeper in the forest, carrying the familiar scent of damp earth. Molly did not come back. By afternoon, people began to look for her. At first, only a few relatives, then more. Voices called her name, but the forest swallowed the sound quickly. The trees did not answer. They found Molly's footprints near an old trail. The prints were clear and even. There were no signs of running, no signs of slipping or struggle. The footprints led straight toward the clearing where the tree stood. Then they stopped. There were no footprints leading away. No overlapping tracks. As if Molly had vanished at that exact spot. 3 days later, after the rain had passed, a man discovered Molly's scarf caught in a cluster of large roots. The cloth was not torn. There was no blood. It was only wet, heavy with the smell of soil. That cluster of roots had not been there before. People stood far back when they saw the scarf. No one touched it. No one tried to pull it free. They left it hanging there, suspended, like a sign that did not require explanation. On the third night after Molly disappeared, some villagers heard the sound of dripping water coming from the forest. It was not rain. The sky was clear. The dripping was slow, steady, echoing from the direction of the tree. No one went to check. The next morning, the ground around the base of the tree was darker and wetter than usual. No body was ever found. There was no funeral. Molly's name was not spoken often after that, not because she was forgotten, but because each time her name was mentioned, someone felt as though they were being pulled a little closer to the forest. Niran stopped speaking as much. He stared at the patch of ground where Molly's footprints had ended, as if trying to imagine what had happened there. Once, he whispered, "That place isn't empty anymore." No one asked him what he meant. The tree remained where it was. But after Molly's disappearance, the roots did more than spread outward. They began to overlap and weave together, sealing the ground tightly, as if hiding something beneath. And in the shared dreams, the number of figures standing shoulder to shoulder grew larger. Chapter 10. The Tree That Bled. The rain came in the middle of the night. There was no warning, no strong wind, just heavy rain falling steadily, as if the sky were trying to press the forest downward. There was little thunder, but a single bolt of lightning struck the clearing, flooding the forest with white light for a brief moment. The next morning, no one entered the forest right away. They stood at a distance and looked toward the tree, and they saw the first thing that no one spoke aloud. From a deep crack running down the trunk of the ancient tree, sap was seeping out. It was not clear sap, not golden. It was dark red, thick, slow-moving, clinging to the bark before dripping down to the ground. It looked like old blood. The sap followed the old carvings, slipping into every groove, as if the scratch marks themselves were guiding it downward. The soil at the base of the tree was darker than usual, damp, carrying a metallic smell. No one went closer. No one reached out to touch it. They simply stood there, watching, feeling a heavy pressure settle in their chests, like something long buried had just been disturbed. All day, the sap continued to ooze. Not in great amounts. Not violently. Just enough that no one could pretend they had imagined it. By evening, the rain stopped. The sap began to dry, darkening as it hardened against the bark. But when night fell, some people heard the dripping again, slow and rhythmic, echoing faintly from the direction of the forest. That night, the shared dream changed. In the dream, the shape bound within the roots began to move. Not much, just a slight shudder that traveled through the massive body. Its mouth opened wider, and this time something spilled from the corners. Not blood, but a dark, viscous substance, like sap. When people woke, many found damp stains on their collars, though they had not been sweating. Niran woke in the middle of the night and stood by the door, staring toward the forest. He spoke very softly, as if afraid of hurting someone. The tree is in pain. By morning, the sap had stopped flowing. The trunk looked dry again, harder than before, but the carvings appeared deeper, more defined, as if the outer layer of bark had thinned, revealing something beneath that was trying to push its way out. No one suggested cutting the tree. No one thought of burning it. They understood that if the tree could feel pain, then it meant it could still respond. And things that could respond could also react. From that day on, something small but unsettling occurred. Birds no longer perched in its branches. Even when exhausted, they avoided the tree. Leaves fell more frequently, yet there were no signs of decay. The tree was not dying. It was only wounded.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The child WHO could no longer sleep. Niran stopped sleeping. At first, it was only short nights. He would fall asleep for a little while, then sit upright on his mat, eyes open, unfocused. Later, the nights became sleepless entirely. His mother sat beside him, placing her hand on his forehead, on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, but rest was no longer the same as sleep. Niran did not complain of being tired. He did not grow irritable. He simply became quieter. Every night, at the hour when the village usually sank into its deepest sleep, Niran stood up, opened the door, and stepped into the yard. He stood there for a long time, facing the forest. He did not walk forward. He did not call out. He only stood, as if waiting for a signal. Once, his mother asked, "What are you doing?" Niran answered without turning around, listening. Not to the wind. Not to insects. He was listening to a rhythm, slow, heavy, repeating, like breathing, but not quite, like someone trying to speak, but unable to find a way out. After the 10th night without sleep, Niran's voice began to change. Not constantly, only at moments, brief, sudden. When answering a simple question, his voice would drop lower, grow rougher, linger unnaturally at the end of a sentence, as if someone unfamiliar with this mouth were using it. His parents did not say what they noticed. They feared that acknowledging it would allow the change to complete itself. One night, the entire village was awakened by a voice drifting from the forest. It was not loud. It was not clear. It was a string of broken sounds, like many people trying to speak at once, all sharing a single breath. The sound lasted only a short while, then disappeared. The next morning, Niran asked, "Did you hear it last night?" No one answered. They looked at him, and for the first time, avoided the eyes of a child. Niran began using words he had never learned. Old, rough words, as if pulled from a distant past. When asked about them, he did not remember speaking at all. But some phrases were remembered because many people heard them. Too tight. No place to lie down. Don't sleep. The following night, Niran did not stop in the yard. He walked toward the forest. Not running, not sneaking, walking slowly, evenly, as if heading toward a place already agreed upon. His father caught him in time and pulled him back. When restrained, Niran did not struggle. He only turned his head, looked directly at his father, and spoke in a voice that did not belong to him. "We are almost complete." From that night on, Niran's house was locked every evening. But locks could not stop thoughts. Across the village, others also began losing sleep. Not because of nightmares, but because they felt that if they slept too deeply, they might not remain fully inside their own bodies. The tree no longer appeared in dreams as often. It did not need to. It had found a voice. Chapter 12. What was buried? The story was not told during the day. It was only spoken when the night was deep enough, when those still awake were too exhausted to react strongly, and when the wind from the forest carried its familiar scent of damp soil into the village. The one who spoke was Tip. Her voice was small and hoarse, as if every word had to pass through something that resisted being said. Long ago, before Ban Maycom even had a name, the forest was restless. Crops failed. People who entered the woods did not return. Children fell ill without explanation. The villagers believed the forest was hungry. And when the forest was hungry, it had to be fed. They did not use animals. They said that was not enough. Those chosen were strangers, prisoners, People with no family ties in the area. They were bound, led into the forest at night, and buried alive in the clearing. There was no tree there at first. Only soil. They buried many, not all at once, but in stages, over many years. When the ground sank, they added more earth. When the smell rose, they burned incense. When they heard screams, they dug deeper. Then, one day, the tree appeared. No one planted it. No one tended it. It grew very quickly, but once it reached its current size, it stopped, as if it was enough, as if it needed nothing more. Those who took part in the rituals died off over the years. Their children were never told the details. They only knew that the tree must not be disturbed, not because it was sacred, but because it was holding something in place. When Tip reached this point, she paused for a long time. Her breathing shortened, her eyes turned toward the forest, even though she was sitting indoors. They did not die, she said, they were kept. No one asked what was being kept. No one asked how. Because Niran was standing in the doorway. He was not looking at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the darkness outside. When he spoke, his voice was not a child's. We are not allowed to lie down. No one dared to move closer. Tip closed her eyes. A single drop formed at the corner of her eye. No one could tell if it was a tear or the night air. The tree is not a spirit, she said, it is a container. That night, the shared dream was no longer vague. People dreamed of the earth opening, of bodies stacked tightly together, pressed so close there was no space for breath, of roots piercing bone, piercing chests, not to kill, but to preserve their shape. And at the center of it all, the tree stood, neither cruel nor kind, simply performing its function. The next morning, Tip died in her sleep. On the trunk of the ancient tree, a new crack appeared, running from the base upward, like a mouth that had just learned how to open.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The night the tree cast its shadow. There was no moon that night. The sky was covered in a dull gray. No rain, no wind, yet the air felt so heavy that breathing deeply made the chest ache. In the village, lamps were extinguished earlier than usual. No one planned it, yet everyone did the same thing. They stayed inside. The tree stood in the forest, silent. But its shadow did not. At first, it was only a vague sensation, as if the shadow on the ground was longer than it should have been. Not because of any light source, for there was none strong enough to cast such a shape. But as eyes adjusted to the darkness, people realized the shadow was no longer attached to the trunk. It separated. Very slowly. Very discreetly. The shadows of the roots crept across the ground like streams of black ink. Bending, recoiling, then stretching again. They did not mirror the actual roots. They chose their own shapes. Some people, watching through narrow door cracks, saw the shadow move in the opposite direction of the tree. Others saw it extend toward the village, thinning, then swelling in unnatural places, like shoulders, a back, a neck. No one dared to watch for long. Because the longer they watched, the stronger the feeling became that the shadow was learning how to stand. Inside Niran's house, the doors were locked. His parents sat close, gripping his hands tightly. Niran did not struggle. His eyes were closed, his lips barely moving, his breathing slow and deep, not the breathing of a child. Outside, the shadow stopped at the edge of the village. It did not touch any house. It did not cross a single threshold. It simply stood there, as if counting. The night stretched unnaturally long. The village clocks stalled at the same hour for far too long. No one slept. No one fully closed their eyes. Some heard a faint scraping sound against the soil, irregular, unhurried, like someone testing their fingernails. Near dawn, the shadow withdrew. Not quickly. Not abruptly. It slid back to its original place, aligning itself with the tree as if it had never left. When the first light appeared, the forest looked so ordinary that people questioned their own memories. But the ground did not. Along the path leading from the forest into the village, faint elongated grooves marked the soil, like drag marks left by something immensely heavy. It was unclear where they began. It was unclear where they ended, only that they led straight back to the tree. Niran opened his eyes when the sun rose. He looked at his parents for a long time. then said softly, exhausted, "Last night, they stood up." No one asked who. Because everyone already knew. The tree did not need to keep everything forever. It only needed to wait until there was enough. Chapter 14. Niran walks into the forest. Niran disappeared at dawn. There was no sound, no door opening, no sign of struggle. When his parents woke, the rope tied across the door was still intact. The lock still fastened, but Niran was no longer there. On the ground in front of the house, small footprints, wet with morning dew, led straight toward the forest. No hesitation. No wandering. The villagers gathered quickly. No one shouted. No one called Niran's name. They understood that raising their voices would only make the forest listen more closely. They followed the footprints at a distance, moving slowly, as if the ground itself might change its mind. The footprints ended at the clearing. The tree stood there. But the trunk was different. It bulged where it had once been flat, as if something inside was shifting. The old carvings had stretched open, their edges dark and damp. The roots rose higher, interlocking so tightly that the soil beneath was no longer visible. Niran stood close to the trunk. His forehead rested against the bark, just as it had the first time they found him here. But now his hands were half sunken into the carvings, as if the wood had softened. Niran did not cry. He did not tremble. His breathing was slow and deep, syncing with another rhythm, the breathing of the forest. No one stepped closer. They watched what happened very slowly. The trunk opened along a narrow seam, not like bark splitting, but like a mouth learning how to open. From inside, there was no rush of blood, only the smell of deep, ancient soil, and within that darkness were shapes standing upright. It was unclear how many. It was unclear who they were. Only that they were not lying down. A hand, or something that had once been a hand, rested on Niran's shoulder. It did not pull. It did not push. It only rested there, lightly. Niran gave a small nod, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. When the trunk closed, there was no sound. Niran's footprints vanished. The ground sank slightly, then settled. The villagers did not remain. They turned back without looking again. No one cried. No one shouted, because they knew there was nothing left to call back. That night, no one dreamed the shared dream. No bound figures. No silent mouths. Only a sleep that was heavy and deep, the first real sleep in many months. By morning, the trunk had collapsed inward. The swelling disappeared. The sap dried and darkened. The roots withdrew slightly, just enough for the old path to reappear. Faint and uncertain. The tree looked lighter, as if it had finally been filled.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Tree Remains. Many years passed. Ban Mei Calm did not vanish all at once. It withdrew. One house after another was abandoned. Paths were slowly swallowed by grass. Those who left never clearly explained why, and those who stayed never asked. They only knew that the forest had changed its breathing. The ancient tree still stood in the clearing. It did not grow larger. It did not shrink. It did not die. The old carvings on its trunk dried and darkened, like scars left long ago. But if one stood close enough, long enough, new, finer marks could still be seen, layered quietly over the old ones. Not many, not hurried, as if the tree no longer needed to rush. No one cut it down. No one dared to suggest it. Those who occasionally passed near the forest all shared the same feeling. The air around the tree felt lighter, but not safer, like a room that had been cleared of furniture, yet was still occupied. On nights when everything was very still, when the wind blew from the right direction, some claimed they could hear many breaths merging into one, not frantic, not desperate, just steady, like a large body asleep. No one stepped closer to listen. No one needed to. From time to time, outsiders passed through. They saw the tree, took photographs, asked questions. The locals did not forbid them. They did not warn them openly. They only said, "Don't sleep there." If the outsiders laughed, no explanation followed. Because the forest did not require belief. It only required presence, long enough. Years later, another child was born in the village. One day, the child asked why the tree stood alone like that. The mother looked toward the forest for a long time before answering, because it's holding a place. Holding it for who? The child asked. The mother did not reply. Because some questions, once answered, become invitations. The tree no longer called anyone by name. It did not need to. What needed to come would find its own way. The tree is still standing. It calls no names. It does not need to keep anyone. What needs to come will find its own way. There are places that do not need to be understood to be frightening. And there are stories that, the more closely you listen, the harder it becomes to sleep.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.